Welcome to the BigUn, part 4 of 4, the final leg. Over the past 3 weeks, Mike and I covered well over 3,000 miles. Starting in Rotterdam, we traversed northern Europe through Germany, past Lake Konstanz, through the Alps, the Dolomites, Slovenia, Croatia, and then through Italy and headed west through France to find ourselves in Carcassonne. Our final leg takes us out of France into Spain, over the Pyrenees and headed west through Spain to the Picos de Europa. Today we're travelling from Carcassonne in France, over the mountains through Andorra to La Seu d'Urgell in Spain. Having been on the road pretty much constantly for around 3 weeks, tiredness was definitely a factor. The days were long, we were missing home, and the heat was, well, very hot. When we reached La Seu, however, the temperature gauge went into overdrive. The whole experience was like life in 2/3 time.
Yeah.
The guy that owned it kind of shuffled around and took his time. You want to eat?
And
Give us an hour.
You couldn't really blame him given the heat.
No, it was fairly oppressive.
Don't think I've ever sat in the shade before and got a suntan.
Yeah, dappled.
Yeah.
Dappled suntan was the way to go. The next morning, Mike and I got up really early, partly due to an infestation of mosquitoes. The hotel from the previous night, the Glorietta, didn't have air conditioning, and we made the mistake of cracking a window open. By 7:30, we were literally itching to be on the road. Our plan to get up early in the day was working out pretty well for us. We could put in a stack of miles before the roads became too busy, and we could complete our travel day before the heat became unbearable. Today we were headed from La Seu, northwest, right across the Pyrenees and into France. Passing through the Spanish ski resort of Piquera, our plan was to continue northwest and on to a tiny little village in the French Pyrenees called La Soulane. We couldn't have asked for better roads or weather, and as a result, Mike and I made pretty good progress. At one point, I remembered the old adage that if you see droppings on the road, you should be on the lookout for whatever put them there. Luckily, Mike had heard the same, it seems, so we were unfazed by a herd of wild horses who mooched across the road like they owned the place. I treated one rather large clump as a roundabout rather than get it over my tyre. And the horses, of course, gave us a stiff ignoring, so we simply pressed on. Despite stopping to admire the views and take a few photos, Mike and I had made great time, and we stopped for lunch in a lovely town called Bozo. We got underway again after an hour or so, but I don't think either of us had actually checked the time. As always, we set a pace that was on the sportier side of touring, but we were about to get a lesson in cornering technique. We were comprehensively left in the dust by a blonde on a Ducati. Be still, my beating heart. Oh, hang on a second, that must be her boyfriend. Perhaps best to just leave him to it. Momentarily, I considered staying with them and trying to learn something from their lines. However, Mike got stuck behind that car, and after all, we are on tour. The last part of today's ride was a riot of downhill flowing bends. I'll admit to getting a little carried away in the excitement. It turns out that Mike was close behind, and he brought a posse of eager followers with him. The last few kilometres simply rushed by us. And before we knew it, we'd arrived at our digs. I think our hosts were a little surprised when Mike and I pitched up just after lunchtime, but they were very gracious about it. We ended up having the most chilled of times, simply taking in the views and catching up with a little bit of admin. The evening meal, served up by our host Jeff the chef, was to die for. Starters of goat's cheese and salad, followed by duck confit, and finally a new dish that I'd never come across before, clafoutis. We raved about it so much that Jeff gave me the recipe, and when I got home, of course I had to make it. Things were going swimmingly, except that is for a small wardrobe malfunction, as I'll explain. When we were in Tavullia, I discovered that the Yellow Peril had gone on a holiday of its own.
Oh, that's right.
And had departed the bike at some point, presumably on the motorway, and escaped the netting. My thought there was, the next thing that's going to happen, because I don't have it, it's going to pour down, we're going to have a plague of locusts and rain and all that kind of stuff, and I'm going to be soaked to the skin. So I wasn't happy until I got a replacement, and we found one on the way into Pisa.
Yeah, I think it was, just on the outskirts of Pisa at a bike shop.
Yeah.
That's right.
Which were fab, and they sold me a fairly expensive but very, very lightweight replacement in yellow for the Yellow Peril, which was great, and so far as a lucky charm, and I'm crossing my fingers and tapping the table, it hasn't rained.
No.
So maybe if you have a really good Yellow Peril and you tuck it away somewhere where you don't intend to use it,
it'll keep the rain away.
We said it now, haven't we?
Yeah.
Frankly, that's buggered the
Yeah, I think we'll probably keep the rain away until we arrive in Portsmouth.
Thanks for that, Mike. Commentator's curse par excellence. We awoke to a light smattering of mist, which then became fog, and finally a peace super.
We had to go up through that cloud the following day.
Yeah, the next day I did remember talking to the lady who, first of all, corrected my pronunciation of what I thought was Argel, and it is Argelès.
Yes.
Fantastic. I now know how to say Argelès. When we told her where we were going, she got that little look across her face like, I wouldn't. But we didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
So it was on with the Yellow Peril.
Yeah.
And off into the bloody clouds again.
Yeah, we climbed up into the clouds. It got damp. Visors started to get misted over. So it was a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
The roads were not brilliant.
No, they were okay. And I always like mountain roads, but they kind of lose their shine a little bit when they gain some shine through the wet.
Yes.
Yeah.
Staying to the north, the French side of the Pyrenees, our route today takes us on the lovely D918 over the Col de Tourmalet. It's quite high, so maybe a little mist was to be expected, but not this much. For a while, the weather seemed to clear up a bit, and we figured we had clear roads ahead of us, save obviously for some slow wildlife and some sheep. Now I'm a sucker for a mountain view, and even though it was cold, the views were simply awesome. As we crossed the top of the col, I saw one of the strangest sights of the holiday. We simply call him Deck Chair Man. To this day I can't fathom why anyone would take a deck chair and sit it on the edge of a precipice, looking out at nothing but fog. And so we finished our day travelling onwards and downwards to Argelès-Gazeau. The mist and fog continued into the next day, but as always, we didn't really have a choice, as we're on a timetable. What goes up must come down, and today, after a little northern loop of the French Pyrenees, we headed back down south to Spain, Jaca to be exact. Given the mist, the balcony roads were a little bit of a challenge, so we picked our way pretty carefully. If you fell off the side, you wouldn't be found until the fog had cleared. Oh, and we discovered that those slimy, unlit, wet tunnels are shared by walkers coming in the other direction. We continued on our merry way, and as we got lower down, the weather cleared up, just like that.
We headed up, I think, through Aubonne, the road of Aubonne, and the Col d'Orbisque, which is one of the mountain peaks, whatever, coming down into Jaca at the end of the day. But before we get there, you go through a very long tunnel that's very cool.
Yeah, it was about 8 kilometres long.
Yes, yeah. And at about 14 degrees, and it wasn't too bad this time. I've done it before, coming out at nearly 30 degrees.
Yeah.
And by the time you reach the other side, you're willing to give up the will to live. It's just so cold.
Yeah.
It wasn't too bad, but when we got outside, we remembered to take the turn for Canfranc Station.
Yes.
Which is the big railway station. And again, very short version of this. They built the railway station as a sort of demonstration piece for the Spanish government, who wanted to branch their railway network into France and beyond. Unfortunately, got the gauge of the railway completely wrong, so they ended up with one gauge for the French side coming from the north, and another gauge from the Spanish from the south. So their solution was to build an enormously long railway station capable of parking a train with all its carriages next to another train with all its carriages, and then offloading all the passengers and the goods and what have you. It's a solution, but I wouldn't have liked to have been in the planning table when they realised their mistake. And it's now a grand hotel.
Indeed.
So I'd love to go back and stay there, because that really would be
considering it was built in the 1920s, I think.
Yes.
It was in remarkably good condition.
And so we finally arrived at our stay for the night in Jaca, or Jaca. The city's great claim to fame is the citadel, also known as St. Pedro's Fort. It's a pentangle construction with each of the 5 buttresses shaped like an arrow. Given that it was built in the 16th century, it's in fantastic condition. On closer inspection, that's due to the fact that it was completely reconstructed in 1968. A visit to the museum in the interior of the fort yields 24 scenarios featuring 35,000 lead soldiers. Mike and I didn't have time on this visit, but I'm sure it would have been utterly fascinating.
And where do we head? Oh, yes. And then it all went a bit sideways, didn't it? Well, first of all...
Pamplona.
Pamplona. Yeah, we took the bikes to Pamplona. Lovely roads on the way there.
Yes.
The sun was out and shining once again, and in this part of the world, all of the roads are lovely. But not as lovely as our lunch stop, which we found completely by chance in a tiny village called Espinal. Our lunchtime host spoke perfect English, was very knowledgeable, and in a friendly exchange, told us where to go.
I was going to go over the hilly twisties, and he said, actually, for a bit, for a change, take this route, and it was kind of down there, followed the course of a river
through the forest.
Yeah, very pretty. Could have been almost English, but sunny.
Yeah.
Given that the ambient temperature was knocking up to 35 degrees, the recommended route, running along the riverbed, was not only a change of pace, it also provided a bit of shade, and that was a welcome relief from the beating sun.
Came out the other side, noticed that there was some smoke in the distance, and as we got closer to Pamplona, realised it was a giant forest fire underway.
Yeah, with helicopters in attendance and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
I was a little concerned, it was quite close to the town, but the fire was going the other way, and they seemed to have got it all under control anyway.
Yeah.
So we arrived in Pamplona, as I say, 35-degree heat, to find that the whole of the centre in which our hotel was based was shut off.
Yeah.
And when we got close, we looked at the signs, and it was shut off to everyone who wasn't a resident, as in staying in a hotel in that area.
Yeah.
So we kind of barged our way past, a bit hot and bothered, to find that it was the last day of the bull running festival.
Yes.
Where everybody was coming out to the town and having a few drinks.
Yeah.
The atmosphere was indeed exciting and dynamic, but Mike and I had some domestic chores to do, namely washing our clothes. In true bike tour style though, this led to some early drinking, which set us up for an epic evening. The washing complete, Mike and I settled down for something to eat. A lovely meal, washed down with a bottle of wine, and of course some more beers. As the evening descended, and after nearly 4 weeks on the road, Mike and I were definitely in the mood to party. Things were going swimmingly until Michael found a supply of 14-year-old Oban whiskey. I was so glad we booked a day off the bikes, as I finished the evening unable to walk without a little support.
Let's just not go into too much detail about the night. The hotel had to be turned into a crime scene. Blood on the carpet, never mind the bed. We both had Pamplona bull running injuries that were nothing to do with the bulls.
Bull running,
Very good.
Yeah.
The next day started rather late and slowly, with a visit to the pharmacists to see if they could do anything about Mike's head. The rest of the day was given over to a restrained walking tour. Pamplona is one of my favourite cities in Europe, so not a bad place to walk off a hangover. There's plenty to see and do: churches, markets, statues, the lot. We'll leave you with an installation entitled The Arse. It's day 28 of our mad dash across Europe. A day spent off the bikes in Pamplona gave Mike and I a chance to review our progress so far. With only 3 riding days left, we decided that we could do without the spare days I'd built in as contingency against breakdowns and the like. We'd still be able to see everything we planned and complete the route, but now we had no get out of jail free card if something went wrong. This decision resulted in a subtle change to our riding style. It's not that we were travelling faster, but we were definitely not taking any prisoners. I guess that, having made the decision to head for home, we just wanted to get on with it. I changed the ferry booking for an earlier crossing, and also changed the dates of a few hotels along the way to Santander. Planning the remainder of the trip at short notice was always going to be a little risky, and we got caught out a bit in Medina. We arrived at our hotel, the Alhambra, to find that the restaurant was closed as it was a Sunday. The lady in reception explained that the town was only a short walk away, so Mike and I set off in expectation of a good feed-up. Medina's a pretty quiet town, and we enjoyed a quick beer in the town square before being distracted by the arrival of a mobile kids' disco. We eventually found a little restaurant out of the way, the only one around by the looks of things, but they were closing just as we walked in. The owner saw the level of panic in our faces and as a compromise offered us some paella, which I guess was ready to serve. We washed it down with a generous helping of local red wine and failed to do justice to the generous helpings. We left a decent tip to say thank you, and it all worked out well in the end, but I'll be making a mental note to allow for Sunday opening arrangements, particularly when travelling in Catholic countries. The next day saw us making our way to Cangas de Onís, or, due to a single mispronunciation from Mike, Gascan. Our run from Medina to Cangas was an absolute delight, flowing roads through hilly rather than mountainous countryside. We stopped at a famous viewpoint, the Balcón de la Cordosa, only to find that Mike had lost his key to his top box. Being a helpful sort of fella, I lent him my utility knife, then retired to a safe distance to make sure that we had photographic evidence of the moment. And then, for a second time, our lack of planning caught up with us with a bang. We couldn't find a cafe to serve us lunch, or even a snack, so we pressed on regardless. This turned out to be a mistake. With hunger now dominating our thinking, we headed towards a hilltop village that we thought would house a cafe.
Yeah, I think that's where we came from.
Not only were we wrong about the cafe, but we'd volunteered ourselves unwittingly for a village-based assault course with no room to turn round. After some discourse with the locals and an awkward 15-point turn, we were at last on our way and headed for something to eat. We stopped for lunch, but I didn't find it particularly refreshing, and for the first time this tour, I found myself wishing the time away. I have to admit that faced with some rather boring roads, the urge to just get on with it rather took over for a while. Like a beach donkey on its last run of the day, I found myself focusing on the destination rather than enjoying the ride. As the afternoon wore on, the roads improved, as did my riding. And after all, I had Cangas to look forward to. We arrived in Cangas, once again hot and bothered, only to find that our accommodation wasn't open. This wasn't the biggest of disappointments, as Cangas is one of my favourite towns in Europe, and we found our way down to a bar under the Puente Romano bridge to feast on chorizo and local cider. Cangas is regarded as the centre of the Picos de Europa and has a lively but chilled evening vibe. Not a bad place to hang out before our last riding day in Europe. Our final riding day took us from Cangas to Santander. I'd allowed plenty of time to take in the scenery rather than simply rush for the ferry. Our route initially took us southwards, down to the Riaño Lake, through a path of those same super winding roads that we encountered yesterday. We even took a moment out of our schedule to let our tame videographer do his thing, with a little staged cornering at the river cellar. The roads around Lake Riano were great, flowing, fast, and empty. Just what the doctor ordered. Lake Riano is both scenic and peaceful, but an even better sight lay in store for us a short way ahead. Travelling along the Calle Enrique Herreros, also known romantically as the N621, we were halted in our tracks by a dense layer of cloud spreading out beneath us. After a short break to take some pickies, I couldn't wait to ride through the cloud layer. It was an ethereal, otherworldly experience, and for me was a real highlight of the holiday. On our approach to the towns of Potus and Panis, also known by the Brits as Pots and Pans, we were getting into the swing of yet more of those lovely gorge roads. I found myself asking whether this day could get any better. It turns out the answer's no, but it could get worse. The Pots and Pans road was almost entirely given over to roadworks, which rather put paid to our fun. And so we made our way rather more slowly to Santander, our final stop in Spain. We stayed at a rather strange hotel, something like a cross between the Munsters Retreat and a medieval museum. But every stay is memorable for its own reasons, I guess. The next day, we took the ferry for a fairly long journey back to the UK. We had a day and a half to kill, so plenty of time for a quick drink and a chance to relax before one last dive across the UK. Speaking of which, Mike and I rode up to Shrewsbury, where we parted company. This left me riding solo to the Isle of Man ferry in Liverpool, taking a quick detour through Wales, our final country of the tour, hitting our target of 20 nations. That last ride gave me the opportunity for a quick review of the tour. It was amazing to think that we covered so many miles and across such a variety of roads in a single trip. Of course, this wasn't just any trip though. It was 5 weeks out of our lives, a huge adventure, and an expensive one to boot. I promised my wife that this was a once-in-a-lifetime deal, something to tick off the bucket list and get out of my system. But I don't think I was fooling anyone. I arrived home, tired but elated, only to be asked by the good Mrs. Ryder where next year's trip would take me to. Stay tuned for the details of next year's trip, and of course a similar trip every year until our collective knees give out. Thanks for watching. Keep it sunny side up until next time, and please carry on watching till the end.